the magical friendship between an injured bear cub and a starving stray cat in the middle of the forest. The truth that followed surprised everyone. How could a starving stray cat and an injured bear cub form a life-saving bond deep in the forest? You might think it was just luck or the instinct for warmth, but the shocking truth hidden in the leaves and roots, the cat delivered challenges. Everything we thought we knew about animal intelligence. Subscribe and like to discover more incredible stories, and listen now to learn the unbelievable truth behind the magical friendship that stunned scientists. The wind howled like a wounded beast through the Appalachian ridges, whipping the early season snowflakes into a blinding frenzy. Sarah gripped the steering wheel of her patrol jeep, eyes narrowed against the near-zero visibility. This wasn't a normal late October snowstorm. It was early, violent, and deadly. Her mission was to check the trails for stranded hikers, but instinct urged her onto an old, seldom-used logging road leading deeper into the wilderness. Something orange flashed in the weak headlights right at the edge of the road. A fox, no too small. Sarah slowed the jeep, sliding slightly on the fresh powder. She rolled down the window, the shriek of the wind instantly filling the cabin. It was a cat, an orange cat, bone-thin, standing shivering in the blizzard, its fur matted and wet. That was strange enough, a domestic cat this far into the wilds. But what made Sarah slam on the brakes was what the cat was doing. It didn't flee from the headlights. Instead, it looked directly at the jeep, let out a pathetic meow, nearly swallowed by the wind, then turned and limped towards a massive tilted oak tree nearby. It stopped, looked back at Sarah, and cried out again, a sound full of urgency. Sarah's heart pounded. This wasn't normal behavior for a wild animal, let alone a stray cat. Despite the raging storm, she pulled on her heavy parka, yanked her hood up, and stepped out of the vehicle, the tranquilizer gun holstered at her hip out of habit. The wind hit her face like icy needles. She trudged through the deepening snow, following the orange shape, waiting impatiently near the fallen tree. As she got closer, she heard another sound beneath the wind, a faint, pained whimpering. The orange cat cried out again, rubbing its head against a pile of leaves and snow beneath the tree's roots. Sarah shone her flashlight on the spot, her breath caught in the frigid air. Huddled in a small, poorly sheltered hollow, lay a black bear cub, no bigger than the cat itself. One of its hind legs was twisted at an odd angle, swollen and stained with blood, frozen dark by the cold. But what made Sarah stare in stunned disbelief was the orange cat. It was pressed tightly against the cub, its small body futilely shielding the larger creature from the storm. It was even gently licking at the edge of the bear's wound. A stray cat and an injured bear cub together in a deadly blizzard. The scene was absurd, dangerous, and somehow profoundly moving. How? Why? Sarah stood frozen for a moment, the storm seeming to pause around the incredible tableau. The Pisgah National Forest in North Carolina is a land of rugged beauty and hidden dangers. For Sarah Jenkins, a seasoned park ranger in her early 30s, it was both office and sanctuary. She'd grown up on the edge of this forest, learning to read tracks before she could read words, and had dedicated her life to protecting the delicate balance of its ecosystem. She'd seen strange things, unusual animal behaviors, but nothing compared to the scene beneath the fallen oak in the early blizzard. The orange cat, which she later named Sunny for its vibrant fur contrasting its gaunt appearance was clearly a survivor. It was thin with a few old scars on its ears and nose, its emerald green eyes sharp and perpetually wary. Sarah guessed it was an abandoned pet or born feral, having learned to exist through wit and luck in an environment not meant for its kind. Seeing it deep in the forest, miles from the nearest human settlement, was unusual enough. Seeing it tending to a bear cub was beyond belief. The cub, a male she tentatively called Ben, was tiny, likely only a few months old, born late the previous winter. The injury to his hind leg looked severe, possibly from a fall from a high tree, or worse, an encounter with a larger animal or a trap. More importantly, his mother was nowhere in sight. A mother bear would never abandon her cub, especially an injured one, unless something terrible had happened to her. Ben's chances of survival alone, injured and in these harsh conditions, were practically zero. The true inciting incident wasn't Sarah finding them. It was the formation of the inexplicable bond between these two creatures before she arrived. Sunny, driven by hunger and cold, should have steered clear of a potential predator, even a cub. Ben, in pain and fear, should have regarded the cat as a threat or ignored its presence. Yet somehow, in their shared desperation, they had found each other. Perhaps Sunny was initially drawn by the whimpering, or maybe the faint scent of blood, hoping for an easy meal, but upon seeing Ben's weakened state, predatory instinct might have given way to something else: curiosity, or perhaps the recognition of another creature in peril. For Ben, the presence of another living being, however small and of a different species, might have offered a sliver of warmth and fragile comfort in his lonely pain and fear. Sarah had seen similar things on a smaller scale, different species huddling for warmth in harsh weather, but the active care Sunny seemed to be providing, licking the wound-shielding Ben, was something else entirely. It went beyond mere coexistence for mutual benefit. Sarah's decision was swift. She couldn't leave them. Using her experience, she approached cautiously, speaking softly to soothe the stressed animals. Sunny hissed weakly, but didn't bolt, wary eyes tracking Sarah's every move. Ben was too weak to react. Sarah administered a mild sedative dart into Ben's thigh, enough to relax him and allow her to examine the wound without causing further pain or panic. Then she gently lifted the sedated cub, his thick fur damp and cold. The next challenge was Sunny. The cat was clearly feral and terrified. But as Sarah carried Ben towards the jeep, Sunny cried out desperately and followed, keeping a safe distance but refusing to be left behind. It leaped into the open jeep right after Sarah placed Ben on a blanket on the back seat. It seemed that, however much it feared humans, its reluctance to leave its unlikely companion was stronger. Sarah closed the door, her mind filled with unanswered questions. The real inciting incident was the moment she realized she wasn't just rescuing two separate creatures. She had intervened in a mysterious and complex relationship, whose beginning and end she couldn't fathom. Her task now was not only to heal physical wounds, but to try and understand what had bound these two improbable survivors together. The Blue Ridge Wildlife Rescue Center, where Sarah worked part-time alongside her ranger duties, was a small but dedicated facility, tucked away in a secluded valley. It was run by Dr. Ramirez, a pragmatic but kind-hearted, middle-aged wildlife veterinarian, and a few devoted volunteers. Sarah's arrival with an injured bear cub and a scrawny feral cat caused quite a stir. A cat. Dr. Ramirez raised an eyebrow as Sarah explained the situation, his voice a mixture of professional skepticism and curiosity. As he examined Ben's leg, "Are you sure they were together, Sarah? Not just the cat scavenging nearby?" "Positive, Doc," Sarah affirmed. "The cat led me right to him. It was huddled up against him and wouldn't leave when I brought them in." Ben's leg was badly fractured, a complex break of the tibia and fibula. Dr. Ramirez performed surgery to set the bones with pins. A delicate procedure on such a small patient. Ben was placed in a special recovery enclosure, kept warm and closely monitored. The prognosis was guarded. Even if the leg healed, rehabilitation for survival in the wild would be long and uncertain. The search for his mother also proved fruitless. There were no reports of missing or injured mother bears in the area. Sunny was temporarily housed in a large cage in a separate area of the center designated for smaller animals. Initially, he was terrified and aggressive, hissing and swiping at anyone who approached. He refused to eat and spent most of his time huddled in the furthest corner of the cage, emerald eyes tracking every movement with intense suspicion. Yet there was something odd. Whenever there was a sound from Ben's recovery area, a soft whimper, the metallic clink of the enclosure, Sunny's ears would prick up and he would rise pacing restlessly, letting out small anxious meows directed towards the sound. Sarah felt a particular responsibility for Sunny. She knew that standard procedure for an unchipped, untamable feral cat often meant transfer to a county animal shelter where its future would be bleak, but she couldn't shake the image of the little cat shielding the bear cub in the storm. She persuaded Dr. Ramirez to give Sunny more time, citing the unusual circumstances of his discovery. She began spending time each day sitting near Sunny's cage, talking softly, making no attempt to touch him. She left tempting food, tuna-cooked chicken, just outside the cage door. Slowly, very slowly, Sunny began to relax slightly. He would eat once. Sarah had retreated to a distance. He stopped hissing every time she approached. Sometimes he would even sit still and seem to listen to her voice, head tilted. Meanwhile, Ben's recovery was slow. The fracture showed signs of mending, but the cub remained weak and lethargic. He ate little and spent most of his time sleeping or lying quietly, sad eyes staring into space. Dr. Ramirez worried about his mental state as much as his physical condition. The stress and trauma of separation from his mother, combined with the pain, are taking a toll. He explained to Sarah, "We're doing everything we can medically, but sometimes the will to live is just as critical." One afternoon, while changing Ben's dressing, Sarah noticed Sunny becoming particularly agitated in his cage across the room. He was meowing constantly and pawing gently at the cage door. On a sudden impulse, Sarah asked Dr. Ramirez, "Doc, can we try something? Just for a minute, let Sunny near Ben's enclosure." Dr. Ramirez looked skeptical. "Sarah, it's a bear and a cat. We don't know what could happen. It might cause more stress for both." "But he seems desperate to get near Ben," Sarah pleaded. "Maybe his presence could help." They were together in the storm. After some deliberation, Dr. Ramirez agreed to a closely supervised trial. Sarah carefully opened Sunny's cage instead of bolting in panic as she half expected Sunny stepped out. Cautiously looked around and walked directly towards Ben's enclosure. He stopped outside the wire mesh, letting out a soft "mrrr." Ben, who had been lying listlessly, lifted his head. The cub made a soft, huffing sound different from his previous pained whimpers. Sonny paced back and forth outside the enclosure, rubbing his head against the mesh. Ben watched his every move. During those brief minutes, a subtle change seemed to come over Ben. He appeared a bit more alert, more focused. When Sarah gently returned Sonny to his cage, Ben watched until the cat was out of sight. That day, for the first time in days, Ben finished his entire meal. This small experiment became part of the daily routine. Each day, Sonny was allowed out for a short supervised visit, with Ben's response to these visits was consistently positive. He became more active, ate better, and even started showing flickers of curiosity about his surroundings. Sonny, too, seemed calmer after each encounter, but then a new complication arose. Sonny started bringing strange items near Ben's enclosure during his visits. At first, it was just dry leaves or bits of grass found on the floor. Sarah and the volunteers assumed it was simple play or the cat's prey retrieval instinct. But then the gifts became more specific. Sonny began bringing in bits of moss, small pieces of bark, and occasionally roots he'd found near potted plants in the reception area or from outside if a door was briefly left open. He would place these items carefully just outside the mesh of Ben's enclosure. Dr. Ramirez dismissed it. Instinctive behavior. Sarah, maybe he's trying to nest or is simply attracted to the smells. But Sarah wasn't so sure. She started paying closer attention to what Sonny was bringing. There was a consistency. It didn't seem random. She collected a few samples, a specific type of moss, a piece of willow bark, a root with a distinct, pungent smell, and began doing her own research. This raised new, more complex questions. What was this cat doing? And why was he doing it for a bear cub? Their relationship was deeper than simple companionship, and the truth behind it was becoming increasingly elusive. Sarah's quiet investigation into Sonny's gifts proceeded slowly at first. She cross-referenced the samples with local flora guides and online databases of Appalachian plants. Her ranger duties and the care of other animals at the center consumed much of her time. Yet Sonny's persistence in bringing specific items to Ben's enclosure spurred her on. The breakthrough came late one afternoon as Sarah reviewed her notes and the collected samples. She paid particular attention to the pungent root Sonny brought most frequently. It looked familiar, but she couldn't immediately place it. She took detailed photos and sent them along with a description of the smell and texture to an old college friend, Dr. Alastair Finch. Now an ethnobotanist specializing in the traditional plant use of Native Americans and Appalachian communities, Alastair's reply arrived the next morning, and it made Sarah sit bolt upright. Sarah, unless I'm completely mistaken based on your photos and description, that looks remarkably like the root of Oplopanax horridus, commonly known as Devil's Club. The email read, "It's not as common in your part of Pisgah as it is in the Pacific Northwest, but populations exist. What's fascinating is that it's been used in folk medicine for generations by numerous indigenous tribes, and even some Appalachian folk healers. It's reputed to have potent anti-inflammatory and analgesic properties. People often mash the root and apply it as a poultice to wounds, bruises, or painful joints. Anti-inflammatory and analgesic. Exactly what Ben needed for his fractured healing leg. Sarah stared at the email, then across the room at Sonny, curled asleep in his cage. A wave of astonishment and disbelief washed over her. Could it be possible? Could a feral cat, possessed the ability to recognize and seek out a plant with specific medicinal properties for an injured animal of a different species. It sounded more like folklore than science. She re-examined the other samples Sunny had brought willow bark, a natural source of salicin, the precursor to aspirin, also known for pain relief and anti-inflammatory effects. Some of the mosses Sunny favored her research indicated had mild antiseptic properties and were used by animals for bedding or occasionally applied to wounds. It was no longer random coincidence. There was a clear pattern, a deliberate selection in what Sunny was doing. The cat wasn't just providing companionship. He was actively participating in Ben's care in a way modern science was only beginning to understand. The phenomenon of animal self-medication or zoopharmacognosy. Wild animals are sometimes observed ingesting specific plants or using substances in their environment to treat their ailments or injuries. But for one animal to do it for another, especially between a cat and a bear, was virtually unheard of. This discovery fundamentally shifted Sarah's perspective. This was no longer just a heartwarming tale of an unlikely friendship between two survivors. This was a potential biological phenomenon, a glimpse into the complexity of animal behavior and the intelligence of the natural world she hadn't thought possible. She immediately shared her findings with Dr. Ramirez. He was initially as skeptical as she had been. "Sarah, it's a fascinating hypothesis, but we need to be very careful," he cautioned. "There could be other explanations. Maybe the cat is simply attracted to the smell of these plants for reasons we don't understand." But as Sarah laid out the evidence, the consistency of the specific plants, their known medicinal properties aligning with Ben's condition, the shift in Sunny's behavior from bringing random leaves to these specific items, Dr. Ramirez began to be persuaded he was a scientist, and the evidence, however unusual, couldn't be ignored. This was the midpoint, the story's turning point. Sarah's focus shifted from simply caring for two victims of circumstance to actively observing, documenting, and trying to understand an extraordinary phenomenon. She began keeping detailed logs of Sunny's behavior, photographing everything he brought, noting Ben's responses. She reconnected with Dr. Finch, who expressed profound scientific interest and offered remote guidance. Sarah's role had changed. She was no longer just a rescuer reacting to a situation. She had become a proactive investigator, a guardian of a natural mystery unfolding before her eyes. She realized she had a responsibility not only to save these animals' lives, but also to document and protect their unique bond. The decision to keep Sunny at the center, the decision to allow their daily contact, now took on new significance. It wasn't just compassion. It was an opportunity to witness and possibly understand something truly special. She had passed a point of no return. She had to see this through regardless of the procedural challenges or skepticism she might face. The truth behind the magical friendship was far more complex and astonishing than anything she could have imagined. As winter truly settled over the Appalachians, blanketing the forest in deep, silent snow life, at the Blue Ridge Wildlife Rescue Center entered a new phase of tension and anticipation. Sarah's focus, alongside her regular ranger and animal care duties, now revolved around the meticulous observation and documentation of the relationship between Sunny and Ben, with guidance from Dr. Finch via emails and video calls. Sarah implemented a more rigorous observation protocol. She installed a small, unobtrusive camera outside Ben's enclosure to record their interactions, especially when she wasn't physically present. Every item Sunny brought was photographed, labeled, and carefully stored. She logged the frequency, time of day, and specific plant material. Sunny selected what she documented continued to amaze her. Sunny seemed to have a routine. He most often brought the Devil's Club root in the morning, depositing it near where Ben usually rested. In the afternoons, he was more likely to bring willow bark or damp moss. Some days, he brought nothing at all, simply sitting near the enclosure, emitting low purrs that seemed to have a calming effect on Ben. There was no explanation other than that the cat was exhibiting a form of intentional care based on what he could find within the limited environment of the center and its immediate surroundings, which he accessed during brief escapes or through items brought in from outside. Meanwhile, Ben continued to recover, but the process wasn't smooth. Although the fracture was healing well, the cub remained fragile and sometimes had setbacks, becoming lethargic and refusing food. During these down days, Sunny's behavior seemed to intensify. He would spend more time near Ben's enclosure, meow more insistently, and redouble his efforts to find and bring back the familiar botanicals. Sarah and Dr. Ramirez couldn't help but notice the correlation when Sunny was actively tending. Ben seemed to bounce back more quickly from his periods of decline. This success, however, brought new challenges. Word of the healing cat and the cat-nursed bear cub began to leak out initially as whispers in the small community surrounding the center, then spreading slightly further. A local newspaper picked up the story and ran a small sentimental piece, scientifically inaccurate, painting it as a modern-day fairy tale. This attracted unwanted attention. Curious onlookers started showing up at the center, hoping for a glimpse of the odd pair. The phone rang more often, with inquisitive calls. More significantly, it attracted the attention of the state wildlife agency officials. Despite Dr. Ramirez's attempts to explain the potential scientific context and the importance of observation, the officials remained concerned about keeping a bear cub, a large and potentially dangerous animal, when grown, and a feral cat, technically an invasive species, in a wild setting. In close proximity, long-term regulations were clear. The ultimate goal for rescued wildlife was release back into the wild if possible, or transfer to a licensed sanctuary. Keeping them for friendship observation wasn't standard protocol. Pressure mounted on Sarah and Dr. Ramirez. They received an unofficial but clear directive: prepare a plan to separate Sunny and Ben needed to be moved to a larger rehabilitation facility, where he could learn necessary survival skills before being evaluated for release in the spring. Sunny, as a feral cat, technically didn't fall under the long-term care mandate of a wildlife rescue center. His future was once again precarious. Sarah felt torn. On one hand, she understood the regulations and the need to prepare Ben for a life in the wild. On the other, she believed the bond between Sunny and Ben was not only unique, but potentially crucial to Ben's ongoing recovery. Separating them abruptly could be detrimental to both, especially Ben, who had shown such sensitivity to Sunny's presence. Furthermore, she felt a deep personal responsibility for Sunny. She couldn't let the cat, after everything he had done, be relegated to an overcrowded shelter, or worse. She spent sleepless nights reviewing the video footage, poring over her notes, trying to figure out the best way to protect both animals without blatantly violating the rules. She debated with Dr. Ramirez, who was also torn between scientific duty and administrative pressure. She communicated frequently with Dr. Finch, who was preparing a preliminary paper based on Sarah's observations and stressed the scientific importance of continued study. The deadline loomed. A decision on Ben's transfer was expected after the New Year holiday. Sarah felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on her. She had saved them from the storm, but could she save them from bureaucracy and misunderstanding? She looked at Sonny, less gaunt now, his orange coat glossier, sitting quietly near Ben's enclosure, and at Ben, slowly but surely regaining strength. Sometimes even making clumsy attempts to play with the leaves. Sonny brought. She knew she had to do something. She had to make a stand, prepare for a final confrontation to protect the extraordinary bond she had been privileged to witness. The world seemed stacked against them, but Sarah wouldn't give up on this unlikely pair. The meeting took place on a cold January morning, the gray sky promising more snow. The representative from the State Wildlife Agency, a man named Thompson with a stern face and a thick file folder, arrived to hear the final reports and render the decision on Ben and Sonny's future. Dr. Ramirez presented the medical data on Ben's recovery, highlighting the progress, but also noting the sensitive periods and the importance of minimizing stress. Then it was Sarah's turn. She knew sentimentality wouldn't suffice. She needed to present the evidence compellingly. With Dr. Finch joining via conference call, Sarah laid out her findings, the carefully documented plant samples, the correlation with known herbal remedies, the video clips showing Sonny's intentional behavior, and the charts suggesting a link between Sonny's care and Ben's stability during recovery. She argued that separating them abruptly at this stage could be psychologically damaging to Ben and would prematurely halt the observation of a unique biological phenomenon that warranted further study. Mr. Thompson listened patiently, but remained visibly unconvinced. "Ranger Jenkins, Dr. Ramirez," he began, his tone measured, "I appreciate your dedication, but we must adhere to protocol. This evidence of zoopharmacognosy is intriguing, but it remains largely anecdotal and requires significantly more research. Before it can justify deviating from established guidelines, Ben needs to be transferred to a standard bear rehabilitation facility. As for the cat," he paused, shuffling papers, "it's feral. It needs to be transferred to the local animal control for assessment." Sarah's heart sank. It seemed all her efforts were futile. Just then, one of the young volunteers burst into the meeting room. Face pale, "Dr. Ramirez, Sarah, it's Ben. He's not breathing right." Everyone rushed towards the recovery area. Ben was lying in his enclosure, gasping, a terrible wheezing sound coming from his throat. It looked like he was choking or having an acute allergic reaction. Dr. Ramirez sprang into action, checking Ben's airway. Outside the enclosure, Sonny was frantic, pacing back and forth, letting out desperate meows, pawing at the mesh. While Dr. Ramirez worked on Ben, Sonny suddenly stopped. He looked around wildly, then darted towards a forgotten bin of gardening supplies in the corner of the room that the volunteers hadn't put away. He rummaged for a second, then dashed back, a dark green leaf clamped in his mouth, a type Sarah hadn't seen him bring before. He ran to the enclosure and dropped the leaf directly in front of the struggling cub. Dr. Ramirez, preparing an emergency injection, glanced at the leaf. He frowned, recognizing it. "That's plantain leaf," he muttered, eyes wide. Known to soothe respiratory irritation and act as an expectorant in folk medicine, Mr. Thompson, who had followed them, witnessed the entire scene with unconcealed astonishment. The cat, in the midst of chaos, had identified and delivered yet another botanical potentially relevant to the bear's immediate emergency. Fortunately, Dr. Ramirez stabilized Ben with medical intervention, but the incident, Sonny's swift and seemingly purposeful action right before the officials' eyes, had a more powerful impact than any presentation could have. Mr. Thompson stood silently for a moment, looking from Ben, whose breathing was slowly evening out, to Sonny, sitting intently just outside the mesh, then back at Sarah and Dr. Ramirez. Finally, he sighed. "All right," he said, his tone less rigid. Perhaps we need to reconsider this. Let me see that data again, Jenkins." The climax wasn't a heated confrontation, but a moment of unexpected crisis, partially resolved by the extraordinary actions of the very subject under debate. The final decision was a compromise, Mr. Thompson impressed by what he'd witnessed and swayed partly by the preliminary scientific data presented by Sarah, and Dr. Finch agreed to postpone Ben's transfer. However, he mandated stricter monitoring and regular progress reports. Crucially, he authorized a special temporary permit, allowing Sonny to remain at the rescue center as a subject of animal behavior research, saving him from transfer to animal control. With Dr. Ramirez's continued care and Sonny's calming presence, along with occasional herbal gifts, Ben made a full recovery. By spring, he was a healthy, active cub. After much discussion and careful evaluation, the team determined Ben had a good chance of successful reintegration into the wild. His release took place on a warm summer morning in a remote part of the national forest, far from human activity. Sarah and Dr. Ramirez watched from a distance as Ben emerged from the transport cage, sniffed the air of freedom, and bolted into the woods back to the world where he belonged. And Sonny, returning him to a feral existence, was never really an option for Sarah. After Ben's departure, Sonny seemed a little lost initially, but he quickly bonded further with Sarah and the other staff at the center. With the special permit, he became an official resident of the facility. He spent his days wandering the grounds, napping in sunny spots in Sarah's office window, or supervising other animal patients from a safe distance. He never entirely lost his wild edge, but the wariness in his emerald eyes was replaced by curiosity and trust. The story of Sonny and Ben, coupled with the findings on potential zoopharmacognosy, gained serious attention in the scientific community after Dr. Finch published the initial observations. It wasn't called magic, but rather a compelling case study of interspecies interaction and potential self-medication behavior. The center received additional funding for research, and Sonny's story helped raise awareness about wildlife conservation and the complexities of the natural world. For Sarah, the experience solidified her love for her work and the forest. She had witnessed something extraordinary, fought for it, and ultimately helped reveal an astonishing truth. Sonny, the scrawny orange cat she found in the storm, was now her loyal companion, a daily reminder of the unexpected connections and deep mysteries still held within the natural world, waiting to be discovered. Sometimes, watching Sonny doze in the sun, Sarah would wonder how Ben was faring out there, and if the two unlikely survivors ever remembered the strange friendship that had saved them both in the winter woods. The miraculous friendship between a man with a deformed arm and a stray cat has touched everyone. Where did Rusty go during those missing weeks? And what strange encounter led him back just in time to save Leo? You know the cat came back, But the reason why involves a shocking twist you won't see coming, revealing another layer to this miraculous friendship. Was it just instinct or something more? Subscribe to hear the full story. Like, if you believe in animal heroes, and listen now to uncover the secret behind Rusty's return. The groan of splintering wood was sickeningly loud, even over the howl of the blizzard. It was followed by an explosive crash that shook the small house to its foundations. Leo gasped as the ceiling above his bed buckled violently, raining down plaster dust, insulation, and icy snow. A heavy beam slammed across the bedroom door, plunging the room into near total darkness and sealing him in. Pain flared along his ribs where a chunk of debris had struck him. He tried to move, but his legs were pinned by a section of collapsed drywall and roof timbers. Outside, the wind shrieked like a banshee, rattling the remaining window panes. Cold air poured into the room, instantly chilling him to the bone. Panic, cold and suffocating, tightened its grip. He was trapped alone in a house that felt like it was tearing itself apart around him. He shouted, his voice hoarse, swallowed by the storm's fury. "Help! Somebody help me!" Silence answered, save for the relentless wind and the ominous creaking of the damaged structure. He pushed futilely against the debris, pinning his legs, using his one good arm, his right arm. But it was too heavy, too solid. His left arm, or rather the stump, where it ended just below the elbow, throbbed with a phantom ache, a useless reminder of the logging accident years ago that had defined so much of his solitary existence. Despair began to claw at him. This was it. Trapped in his own home during the worst blizzard in years, injured, unable to move, unable to call for help. His nearest neighbors were half a mile down the snow-choked road. No one would even know anything was wrong until the storm passed, maybe days from now. By then, it would be too late. The cold was already seeping deep into his bones. Then through the chaos came another sound, a frantic scratching at the other side of the blocked bedroom door, followed by a series of insistent, desperate meows. "Rusty!" Leo breathed disbelief, warring with a surge of desperate hope. It couldn't be. Rusty had vanished weeks ago, disappeared without a trace, leaving Leo heartbroken and more alone than ever. Yet the sound was undeniable. That determined, slightly raspy meow belonged to the scruffy orange stray cat who had unexpectedly become his sole companion. "Rusty, I'm in here, get help!" Leo yelled, his voice cracking. The scratching intensified, accompanied by more urgent cries. The cat was trying to get to him, or trying to alert someone, anyone. A tiny, fragile ember of hope flickered in the terrifying darkness. Could the cat possibly save him? Could this creature he'd rescued from the roadside now somehow rescue him in return? Trapped beneath the wreckage, with the storm raging outside and the structure groaning around him, Leo's survival now inexplicably rested on the loyalty and intelligence of a small orange stray cat. Leo Dubois had sought refuge in the quiet isolation of coastal Maine. 15 years prior, a catastrophic accident at a logging site had claimed his left arm below the elbow and fundamentally altered the course of his life. The constant stares, the awkward questions, the pity, it had driven him from his previous life, his previous self. He bought a small, secluded house outside the fishing village of Port Clyde, a place where he could retreat and lick his wounds, both physical and psychological. He turned to painting, a passion he'd dabbled in before the accident. Adapting was excruciatingly difficult. He taught himself to stretch canvases using clamps in his feet, to open stubborn paint tubes with pliers held in his teeth, to steady his brush with an intensity that often left his right arm aching. His art became his solace and his voice. Rugged seascapes, stark pine forests, the moody light of the Maine coast, rendered with a fierce melancholic beauty. He rarely showed his work content to fill his small home studio with canvases that reflected his inner world. He kept to himself, his interactions limited to brief nods at the general store or necessary exchanges with the oil delivery man. Loneliness was a constant low hum beneath the surface of his quiet routines. His solitary existence was unexpectedly disrupted one late summer afternoon. Driving back from a rare trip to Rockland for art supplies, he spotted a flash of orange fur huddled at the edge of the winding coastal road. He slowed down, peering through the windshield. It was a cat unnaturally still. Against his ingrained habit of non-involvement, Leo pulled over. The orange tabby was young, but clearly roughed up by life on its own. Its fur was matted, it was painfully thin, and one of its hind legs was bleeding freely from a nasty gash, likely from a run-in with barbed wire or another animal. Leo hesitated. Caring for an animal, especially an injured one, would be complicated with only one arm. Opening cans, cleaning wounds, handling a potentially frightened creature. It all presented challenges. He could call animal control, but the local shelter was small, often full, and an injured stray's prospects weren't always good. He looked into the cat's wide, wary green eyes. There was fear there, but also a spark of defiance, a reflection perhaps of his own stubborn survival instinct. He made a decision. Carefully using a towel from his car to avoid getting scratched and struggling slightly to manage the cat's weight and his own balance with one arm, he managed to lift the injured animal and place it gently in a cardboard box. On the passenger seat, the cat hissed weakly, but didn't fight. This act of unexpected intervention, of choosing connection over solitude, despite the inherent difficulties, was the inciting incident. He drove home not just with art supplies, but with a new fragile responsibility. He named the cat Rusty, partly for his color, partly for the neglected state he'd found him in. The quiet routines of Leo's house were about to change, whether he was fully prepared for it or not. Bringing Rusty home was stepping across a threshold, an unconscious acknowledgement of the loneliness he'd long tried to ignore. The first few days were a tense negotiation. Leo set Rusty up in the corner of his studio, providing food, water, a makeshift bed from an old sweater, and tending to the injured leg as best he could. Cleaning and bandaging the wound with one hand was incredibly awkward. Leo had to carefully pin the protesting cat between his knees, working quickly and speaking in a low, calm voice. Rusty remained deeply suspicious, hiding behind stacks of canvases, only darting out to eat when Leo was preoccupied with painting or had left the room. Leo painted. It was what he did. He worked at his modified easel, mixing colors on a palette held steady by a clamp, his focus intense. He started talking to the cat, narrating his process, describing the changing light outside, commenting on the seagulls' cries. He wasn't expecting a response. It was simply less lonely than talking to himself. Gradually, Rusty's fear began to subside, replaced by curiosity. He'd emerge from hiding, find a patch of sunlight on the paint-splattered floorboards, and watch Leo work, green eyes tracking the movement of the brush. Slowly, trust blossomed. Rusty started rubbing against Leo's leg, always the right one, emitting a rusty-sounding purr that grew stronger each day. He'd hop onto a stool near the easel, observing the canvas take shape. Opening the cans of cat food remained a clumsy, often messy process for Leo, usually involving holding the can steady with his knees or feet while manipulating the pull tab or can opener with his right hand. But Rusty seemed to wait patiently through the ordeal. Leo found himself smiling more, the low hum of loneliness fading, replaced by Rusty's quiet companionship and occasional demands for attention. He even risked introducing Rusty to Mrs. Gable, his nearest neighbor, a kind but pragmatic elderly woman who sometimes stopped by with baked goods. She eyed Rusty skeptically. "A stray Leo. Are you sure that's wise? They can carry diseases, and what happens when he wants out?" She clucked, though she softened. When Rusty unexpectedly rubbed against her ankles, Leo assured her he'd take Rusty to the vet once the leg was fully healed, deflecting her concerns. He knew, however, that integrating Rusty fully into his life presented unknowns. The bond deepened over the fall months. Rusty became Leo's shadow, following him from the studio to the small kitchen, sleeping curled up on a rag rug near Leo's bed at night. Leo found himself adjusting his routines around the cat, making sure fresh water was always available, buying specific types of food Rusty seemed to prefer. He even attempted to sketch Rusty, though the cat rarely held still long enough for more than quick gesture drawings. The house felt warmer, fuller. Leo hadn't realized how much he needed this connection until Rusty provided it. His art even seemed to change subtle shifts in color, perhaps a less melancholic undertone creeping into his landscapes. Then one crisp November morning, Rusty was gone. The food bowl was untouched. The usual spot by the window was empty. Leo called, searched the house, then frantically scoured the yard and the surrounding woods, his one arm making the process of pushing through underbrush awkward and slow. Panic seized him. Had Rusty simply reverted to his stray nature and wandered off? Had he been chased away by a fox or fisher cat? Had Mrs. Gable's unspoken concerns been realized in some way? He spent days searching his voice, growing hoarse from calling Rusty's name. He put up makeshift posters at the general store and the post office, feeling exposed and foolishly hopeful. The silence in the house returned, but now it felt amplified, unbearable. The loss of Rusty was far more profound than he could have anticipated. It wasn't just losing a pet. It felt like losing a vital part of himself, the part that had cautiously begun to reconnect with the world. His painting faltered. He'd stare at blank canvases, the inspiration gone, the solitude now oppressive rather than comforting. Weeks passed. Winter began to set in, bringing early snow flurries and a deepening chill. Leo sank into a quiet despair, convinced Rusty was gone for good, leaving him truly alone once more. The disappearance of Rusty plunged Leo back into a solitude far deeper and more painful than before. Having experienced the warmth of companionship, its absence was now a raw ache. The vibrant colors on his palettes seemed to mock him. The seascapes outside his window felt bleak and devoid of inspiration. He stopped painting altogether, letting dust gather on his canvases and easel. The studio, once a sanctuary filled with the quiet presence of the cat, now felt like an empty tomb, echoing his failure. Failure to keep Rusty safe, failure to hold on to connection. Mrs. Gable stopped by once, offering condolences and a casserole, her earlier skepticism replaced by genuine sympathy. but Leo could barely muster the energy for polite conversation. He was adrift in grief and resignation. Winter tightened its grip on the Maine coast. Days grew shorter, darker. News reports began forecasting a major nor'easter, warning of blizzard conditions, heavy snow accumulation, and potential power outages. Leo barely registered the warnings, listlessly going through the motions of stocking firewood and checking his generator, more out of long habit than any real concern for himself. What did it matter? The storm hit with savage fury overnight. Wind howled like a freight train driving snow, horizontally piling drifts against the house. Sometime in the deepest, darkest hours, the world exploded. The terrifying crash jolted Leo from a restless sleep. Disoriented, choking on dust, he realized instantly that something catastrophic had happened. The ancient pine tree towering over his small house had succumbed to the wind's violence. He found himself trapped, pinned, the crushing weight of his own home threatening to entomb him. The initial shock gave way to a chilling clarity. This was likely the end. The despair he'd been nursing for weeks curdled into a stark, primitive fear. He was going to die here alone, buried in snow and wreckage. It was in this abyss of hopelessness that the scratching sound began at the sealed door. Faint at first, then more insistent, and the meowing disbelief warred with a desperate, illogical surge of adrenaline. Rusty. The cat's return at this precise moment of mortal peril was the definitive turning point. It shattered Leo's resignation. Suddenly, survival wasn't just an abstract concept. It was a desperate imperative, fueled by the impossible reappearance of his lost companion. Rusty wasn't just back, he was trying to help. This wasn't a passive discovery or a calculated decision by Leo. It was an external miracle, a catalyst forced upon him by circumstance and the inexplicable loyalty of an animal. The despair vanished, replaced by a fierce, focused will to live. "Rusty, help! Get help!" he yelled, pouring every ounce of strength into his voice. Hearing the cat respond with more frantic cries ignited a primal need to fight back against the crushing weight, the cold, the storm. He was no longer passively waiting for the end. He was actively participating in his own potential rescue, directing his small, furry, improbable ally. The bond he thought severed the connection he mourned had reappeared in the darkest hour, offering not just comfort, but a tangible, clawing, meowing lifeline. The game had changed. Survival, once unthinkable, now seemed remotely possible, all thanks to the miraculous return of Rusty. Trapped beneath the debris, cold seeping into him, Leo focused his entire being on the sounds coming from the other side of the blocked door. Rusty's frantic meows and scratching were the only proof he wasn't completely alone, the only link to the outside world. "Keep it up, Rusty!" Leo shouted, his voice hoarse against the wind's howl. "Be loud! Go get someone!" He didn't know if the cat understood the words, but the urgency in his tone seemed to register. The meows became sharper, more piercing, less panicked, and more purposeful. The scratching shifted, moving away from the immediate doorframe towards the hallway, as if Rusty was trying other avenues or attempting to make noise further afield. Time became elastic, stretching and contracting. Minutes felt like hours. The cold was relentless, numbing his pinned legs, making his teeth chatter uncontrollably. The damaged structure of the house groaned and settled around him, each creak sending fresh waves of fear through him. Could the rest of the roof collapse? Was the floor beneath him stable? He tried shifting again, using his right arm to push against a heavy timber, pinning his thighs, but the pain was blinding and the debris didn't budge. He was utterly helpless, dependent on the efforts of a small cat and the chance that someone somewhere might hear him over the blizzard's roar. He could hear Rusty pacing in the hallway outside the blocked door, letting out sequences of loud, demanding meows, then pausing as if listening, then starting again. Leo strained his ears, hoping to catch any sound beyond the storm and the cat. A distant snowplow, a human voice, anything. There was nothing. The isolation felt absolute. He thought about Rusty's journey back. Where had he been for all those weeks? How had he found his way home, especially in this weather? The cat must have been driven by some incredible instinct, some powerful homing sense or loyalty that defied explanation. The thought warmed him slightly, a small counterpoint to the invasive cold he had taken in a stray, and that stray had, against all logic, returned to him in his moment of greatest need. Hours seemed to pass. Leo drifted in and out of a hazy state, exhaustion and cold threatening to pull him under. He forced himself to stay awake, calling out encouragement to Rusty whenever he heard the cat's efforts flag, "Good boy, Rusty, keep trying, don't stop." Then faintly, at first he thought he heard something else, a different sound, muffled by the snow and wind. A shout. He held his breath, listening intently. Rusty heard it too. His meows became frenzied, continuous. "Hello, anyone in there?" The voice was closer now, clearer. "Human, yes, help. I'm trapped in the bedroom." Leo yelled back, hope surging through him with dizzying force. "The tree fell. I'm pinned." "Okay, hang on. We heard the cat." The voice replied, "We're trying to get to the door." There were sounds of crunching snow, muffled thuds. Likely people trying to clear a path or assess the damage from outside. Rusty continued his vocal barrage, a furry SOS beacon. Leo could hear people shouting instructions to each other, the sound of shovels hitting packed snow, maybe even the distant whine of a chainsaw attempting to cut through the fallen tree blocking the main entrance. The wait was agonizing. Progress seemed incredibly slow. Against the fury of the storm and the weight of the debris, Leo could hear wood splintering near the hallway, the sounds of prying or cutting. Rusty stayed close to the noise, meowing encouragement, or perhaps directing the efforts in his own feline way. The air in the room grew thicker with dust. As rescuers worked on the blockage, Leo coughed, shielding his face with his arm. The cold felt less important now, overshadowed by the imminent prospect of freedom. He focused on Rusty's meows, a constant reassurance that help was truly there, drawn to his plight by the unwavering efforts of his small orange friend. The tension was palpable. The race against the cold, against the potential for further collapse, all guided by the unlikely heroics of a stray cat in a blizzard. With a final wrenching groan of tortured wood, a section of the blocked doorway gave way. Light, harsh and white, from powerful flashlights pierced the dusty gloom. Figures, bundled in heavy winter gear, peered in. "Leo, you in there? Can you hear us?" It was Dave Hansen, chief of the town's volunteer fire department, his face grim behind an ice-caked hood. "Yes, Dave, I'm pinned. My legs." Leo's voice was weak, trembling with cold and relief. Working quickly and efficiently, Dave and two other firefighters assessed the situation. They saw the heavy beams pinning Leo, the precarious state of the remaining ceiling. Rusty darted around their legs, meowing insistently, occasionally batting at a boot as if urging them to hurry. "All right, Leo, we're gonna get you out," Dave said reassuringly. "Gonna be a bit noisy. just hang tight. Using pry bars and sheer manpower, they carefully began lifting and shifting the debris off Leo's legs. It was slow, painstaking work, punctuated by the creaking protests of the damaged house. Leo gritted his teeth against the waves of pain as pressure was released from his trapped limbs. Through it all, Rusty stayed close, a small orange presence winding through the chaos, never taking his eyes off Leo. Finally, agonizing minutes later, Leo was free. The firefighters gently eased him out from under the timbers, supporting his weight. He was freezing, bruised, and shaken, but miraculously, nothing seemed broken, beyond perhaps some cracked ribs. As they helped him towards the makeshift opening, Rusty darted forward and rubbed hard against Leo's good leg, letting out a series of triumphant, rumbling purrs. Leo reached down with his right hand, burying his fingers in the cat's thick fur. "You did it, Rusty!" He choked out tears, blurring his vision. Tears of pain, relief, and overwhelming gratitude. "You saved me." The firefighters exchanged glances, a shared look of weary amazement. Outside the ravaged room, huddled neighbors, including Mrs. Gable, watched the scene unfold, their faces reflecting awe and concern. They had heard the cat's cries cutting through the blizzard, a desperate sound that had alerted them something was terribly wrong at the reclusive artist's house long before they could have known otherwise. The climax wasn't just Leo's extraction, it was the undeniable witnessed proof of the cat's incredible loyalty and the powerful bond that had saved a life. The aftermath of the storm saw the small coastal community rally around Leo in a way he'd never experienced. News of Rusty's heroism spread like wildfire. People who had previously only offered polite nods now stopped by Leo's temporary lodging, a neighbor's spare room with food offers of help and genuine warmth. The volunteer fire department organized work crews to stabilize Leo's house and clear the fallen tree. Mr. Henderson, the retired carpenter, offered to help repair the damaged studio. Leo, recovering from his injuries, bruised ribs, and severe exposure, found himself awkwardly accepting the help, touched by the outpouring of support. People weren't just helping him. They were honoring Rusty. The orange cat, now plump and basking in his newfound fame, became a local celebrity. Accepting pats and admiration with regal nonchalance, though he rarely strayed far from Leo's side, the shared crisis and the story of the miraculous friendship broke down the barriers of Leo's self-imposed isolation. Neighbors saw past the missing arm and the reclusive habits. They saw a kind man who had rescued an animal, and an animal who had in turn rescued him. They saw the power of an unlikely bond. Conversation started easily now. Mrs. Gable became a regular visitor, always bringing a treat for Rusty. Leo even agreed to display a few of his paintings, the ones salvaged from the damaged studio at the local library, a step towards reconnecting with the world he wouldn't have considered before months later. With the house repaired and spring returning to the Maine coast, Leo's life found a new equilibrium. He still cherished his quiet time painting in the rebuilt studio, but the oppressive loneliness was gone. Rusty was a constant presence, curled on his stool or batting at stray paintbrushes. Leo often sat on his porch in the evenings. Rusty settled comfortably beside him, greeting neighbors who walked by. He was still the one-armed artist, but he was no longer defined solely by his absence or his solitude. The friendship between the man and the cat remained a beloved local tale, a reminder of resilience, the surprising depths of animal loyalty, and the way connection can blossom In the most unexpected circumstances, Rusty the scruffy stray had not only saved Leo's life, but had also guided him back into the warmth of community. Their miraculous friendship had indeed touched everyone, leaving an indelible mark on the small town and transforming two solitary lives into one shared story of hope.